This is Outlaw, America's alternative voice. This week, our special guest is Broward County Sheriff Al Lamberti. Now, your host of Outlaw, Dean Trantalis.
Welcome back. This is Dean Trantalis with Outlaw, America's alternative voice. The first half of our show, we had the opportunity to speak with both Sheriff Al Lamberti and Captain Rick Wierzbicki about the policies within the Sheriff's Department concerning the attitudes and the conduct of individual deputies who interact with the gay and lesbian community in their law enforcement role. And we've also talked about hate crimes, which is their enforcement of conduct between individuals in the public, one against the other. The Southern Poverty Law Center came out last year with an article and statistics about hate crimes and which minority groups are more inclined to be the victims of hate crimes. And they singled out certain well-known victim groups of minorities of hate crimes. They included Jews, African Americans, Muslims, as well as members of the gay community. And their conclusion, without going into all the statistics, was basically that the gay and lesbian community was by far the most victimized of those by hate crime activity. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce again Mike Albetta, who has spent many years with the gay community. He's been an activist. He's been an outspoken individual regarding a lot of subjects, but in particular, Mike has been a loyal member of the gay community in its efforts to defeat hate and discrimination. And he has worked closely with the Sheriff's Department over the past recent years in its efforts to weed it out of the department itself when we've heard of incidents where there was conduct by a particular deputy or officer against a gay individual, or in terms of the enforcement of the hate crimes legislation that exists in Florida. Michael, you've heard the statistic that I just talked about, the inclination that a person within the gay community is more likely to be victimized by a hate crime. Tell us a little bit about your experience and how you feel the gay community feels towards law enforcement when it comes to issues that concern sexual orientation.
Good evening, first of all, Dean. How are you? Thank you very much for allowing me to be on your show this evening.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Always want to hear your voice.
And let me say it is truly an honor and a pleasure to work hand in hand with Broward Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Al Lamberti, and also Captain Rick Wierzbicki. It's been a relationship in regards to the GLBT community, and basically it's educating, and it's called education. There are 15 chapters throughout the state of Florida right now of the Florida GLBT Democratic Caucus, and what I always, every chapter that we go in that has a conference, let me just give you an onset. What we always say is we invite the sheriff of that county, whether it's Gainesville, whether it's Miami-Dade, whether it's down in Monroe, or whether it's in Hillsborough, and we want them to interact and to see us, that the gay community of race, creed, color, sexual orientation, and basically create a relationship that way.
Why do you think that's important? Is it to break down the walls that, I mean, let's face it, the gay community has often been victimized by law enforcement. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was an organization in Fort Lauderdale called GUARD, Gays Unite Against Repression and Discrimination. It was specifically set up because of the constant attacks members of the gay community felt were being perpetrated upon them, and it was a grassroots effort to raise awareness within the community at large of things that were going on, not necessarily acts being perpetrated by the Sheriff's Department, but various law enforcement departments within the county, and that later was manifest in various committees in different cities. For example, in Fort Lauderdale, they set up a citizen police review board, which was an attempt to bring officers to the table and say and ask them to explain conduct that was perpetrated not just against gay individuals but against anybody. But we were one of the leaders in getting that committee established, and it exists today. I would like you to talk to us about how do members of the gay community feel towards law enforcement officers when it comes to situations in which they could not necessarily be related to sexual orientation? Say a simple traffic stop. Say it's any kind of situation which a police officer is acting one-on-one with an individual.
I'm very familiar with GUARD, and I'm very familiar with the past, but I want to talk about the now and the future. Sheriff Al Lamberti is the now and the future, and he has definitely changed the tide. He is the commanding officer of all the chiefs of the county, and he has set a precedent where they now have a precedent within theirs. There's now gay liaisons of offices in each. I know of Fort Lauderdale, of Wilton Manors. There's openly gay offices now in townships and throughout the Broward County. And the sheriff here has set a very strong educational force, such as he brought about at Cinema Paradisimo, made a very big, actually twice already, about Bullied, the movie about students being harassed within school systems. He's reached out into the school systems and said it is a crime to bully GLBT students and also any student.
Well, what brought about this? You've been experienced in this community for quite some time now, and recruiting officers into the ranks of the sheriff's department hasn't always been the policy of the sheriff department. And what do you think brought this outreach together?
Sheriff Al Lamberti has brought the outreach. Sheriff Lamberti works hand in hand.
This is becoming a commercial for Sheriff Al Lamberti.
No. I'm very serious about this. The sheriff has reached out into the various different communities. He regardless race, creed, color, sexual orientation, people are people to him. And he reaches out to the communities, whether it's the black community, whether it's the Hispanic community, whether it's the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and also the gay community. The LGBT community, he has shown time and time again. He has just recently had Sheriff's Day at the Pride Center just last week, and which is the Pride Center in Wilton Manors. And he's reached out into various different areas.
Let me
Crusader, Dean, also
Okay.
too, a Crusader where he had Governor Charlie Crist come in and sign legislation right on this, not too far, a block away from the site of where Norris Gaynor was murdered, and he had the family come. This is a piece of legislation that couldn't get passed for 19 years, and he finally got the Republicans to side with the Democrats and said enough is enough. Sent Catherine Wisbicki up there 8 times up to Tallahassee and said, this is a crime. This was a black veteran gay person who was murdered. And this needs to be brought about, and this needs to be also again through the whether it's the political the gay political associations, wherever. He's reached out and made sure his chiefs, his officers were inside, asking, what else can we do? What else? How can you educate us?
Well, you're putting a lot of emphasis on the person Al Lamberti, but if Al
it's
Lamberti,
the agency itself.
Well, that's what I'm questioning now. If Al Lamberti should go on to higher office or decide to retire, will that culture still exist?
No, he has set a precedent. Matter of fact,
the culture would not exist. In other words, if he left, the respect for the gay community would leave with him?
No, the precedent is set there. For instance, the Dolphin Democrats, and I'm sorry to say, we just honored a member of his staff, which is the senior lawyer of who actually brought in, that is written into context of hiring transgender within the Broward Sheriff's Office.
Recruitment.
Okay. Correct. He has reached out to now, never you've seen before, and it's in the.
So you're saying this is the policy now?
It's policy.
Okay.
It's now also there's hiring ads in the agenda, hiring ads in Florida, South Florida Gay News, ads in hotspots. You never saw this before. This is like a total, it's a 180-degree turnaround. I mean, to hiring officers within the Broward Sheriff's Office.
Okay. We have a caller here. Louise, are you on the air, Louise?
Oh, hello. I think you were beginning to answer my question. My question was, who had the higher authority in Fort Lauderdale? Which does the sheriff of Broward County have authority over the police, say the police chief of Fort Lauderdale, or vice versa, or?
Al, why don't you answer that question?
You're gonna have to repeat it for me, Dean.
Okay.
I can't hear it from
her
this side.
question was:
Yep.
Does your position as sheriff of Broward County have power superior to that of police chiefs in the various city police departments? Is that your question, Louise?
Yes.
Well, in a nutshell, the answer to that is yes. The sheriff has countywide authority for all criminal activity that go on in the county. We police 14 cities ourselves, and the port and the airport. So we have primary jurisdiction in those municipalities. But the cities that have their own police department, they would be the primary jurisdiction, and it's their responsibility to investigate those crimes. However, the sheriff's office has countywide jurisdiction. If there are issues in those cities, we do have the authority to go in and conduct our own investigation. So basically, the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer in the county, and we do have jurisdiction countywide.
So you can police the police.
We can do that, and if that happens, sure, we do go in and do that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Louise.
Okay.
Getting back to Mike. This is an interesting question that Louise has asked, because it's important for people who are listening, people who live in Broward County, to understand where the culture is established, how it's enforced, and the people who are members of the gay community, which continue to grow, as you know, within Broward County. What is it that they are experiencing as they come to live and work and go to restaurants and wonder if they're going to be, kicked out of a restaurant because they happen to be holding hands, or if they happen to walk into a hotel and two women kiss? What type of culture do you think now exists in law enforcement, to the best of your own experience, as it's been conveyed to you by your colleagues in the gay community?
I believe that this is changed drastically through various different cities. Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors, Hollandale Police Department, the various different police departments, Hollywood. Hollywood has changed drastically.
Well, we had a recent incident with Hollywood, did we not?
That is correct, and we, the gay community, have brought light to that. We're not taking it no more. Enough is enough.
Well, let's talk about that incident so people understand exactly what you're saying. There was an incident in which, I assume you're talking about the
Verdugo case.
Yeah, Michael Verdugo, who was fired from the police department, and I believe that particular police department went above and beyond and tried to get him denied to his right to be hired in any police department within Florida, and there was a rather high-profile case that went on for quite a while. And tell us a little bit about that and what the result was and why you feel Hollywood has changed today.
Well, it was brought to the attention, to the media's attention, also to the highly visible of the gay community's attention regarding the discrimination that happened within that police force of Michael Verdugo. I believe the outcome was in favor of Michael Verdugo, and it was if I recall that the state.
The state denied Hollywood's petition,
correct.
So it would allow Mr. Verdugo to apply for another law enforcement agency job.
That is correct.
But Hollywood still did not rehire him.
That is correct.
And they denied him his right to work for Hollywood Police because they felt he did something in his past that he was engaged in some kind of movie that the police chief thought it was I don't know, just wasn't tasteful enough for their sensibilities, and therefore they used that as an excuse for him to be denied further employment. And that became a big sticking point because it was a cultural thing where the gay community, if I recall correctly, felt that they were insulted because if a straight person engaged in a similar type of act or conduct, that they never thought that that particular type of conduct would be redressed in the way that it was with Mr. Verdugo. Am I understanding that situation correctly?
That is correct.
So getting back to our question, with the gay community now having gone through a long progression from the late 70s to the 80s up until now, you're saying to us tonight that you feel that the law enforcement agencies, in particular the Sheriff's Department, you feel there's been a maturing process.
Correct.
Each side perhaps has matured?
That is correct. There's more of an outreach within both sides, and we have educated more. There is more. I know that Broward Sheriffs have an advisory committee.
And I do want to point out, Dean, that number one, my opinion is every law enforcement agency needs to reflect the community that they serve. The Broward Sheriff's Office is 49% minority in our 6,000 employees. But also, Michael's not going to blow his own horn, but we appointed him to the board of directors of Broward County Crime Stoppers. That had never happened in the past, and I want the GLBT community to participate in the agency. And we thought no better person to do that than Mike Alberta. So he now sits on the board of directors of Broward County Crime Stoppers, and that agency looks at crime countywide, whether it be hate crimes or anything else.
Well, let me ask you, would that have ever happened if the numbers of the gay community had not risen to the point where they are today? In other words, what happens if the gay community was a fraction of what it is today? Would the respect still be afforded to members of the gay community as much as it is today, and the outreach being given towards the gay community exists as much as it does today if it weren't for their numbers because they vote? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, probably not, but you still have to reflect the community that you serve. And if there's any GLBT population in your jurisdiction, you need to be sensitive to that. And I believe that. I firmly believe that. And it has to happen. Again, you have to reflect the population that you serve. And those numbers do carry a lot of weight, and your voice gets heard. And again, for me, that's why I wanted somebody on Crime Stoppers, on the board of Crime Stoppers, because as these hate crimes, we talked about rewards. Crime Stoppers is doing rewards now for information on hate crimes. That never happened before.
So you're saying that it's you're now trying to create a culture because at some point, should you retire, the gay community does not want to think that the culture goes with the person who encouraged it or who created it. And so am I understanding correctly through what Mike Alberta has said, that you are institutionalizing this culture? It's part of your sensitivity training, it's part of your rules, it's part of your recruitment process. Is that what you're telling us tonight?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to ingrain it in the agency. The recruiting ads, as Mike talked about, that's part of it. The human diversity and cultural sensitivity training is part of it. Again, the recruiting, the policies, because if I leave, those policies don't go away. I hope they don't. And those are the kind of things that you try to ingrain in the organization from the bottom up. And I don't think they're going to go away.
Captain Wierzbicki, let me ask you a question. We're approaching the end of our show, and there are a couple of things I want to make sure we talk about. So, being the head of the Hate Crimes Anti-Bias Unit, have you noticed a change in the number of hate crimes that have been statistically reported so far within Broward County your unit had any impact on the level of the incidents that have occurred? Have you noticed any changes?
The numbers have been pretty level, but we're kind of living by a double-edged sword, because are we proud we're number one in hate crimes? No, but for the last 3 years, we've been encouraging people to report, as the sheriff said earlier. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. The new year or the 2010 report for last year should be out within next week. I'm very anxious to see what those numbers say, along with the federal numbers too.
So even, let's say the numbers have gone up. How do you intend to redouble your efforts to try to respond to this? What do you think is necessary that needs to take place in our community?
We need more tolerance training in our schools and in our homes. That's where it starts. We need to break the cycle of hate both in the school and in the home.
So, and do you have any suggestions? Does the Sheriff's Department intend to engage in any programs that bring it into the schools or into the homes?
We've been doing that, for the last 3 years, working with the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have an extension of curriculums going from pre-K all the way to high school and universities. And actually in preschool, they teach games, how the kids play with each other, different kids, different games, and to respect their cultures. So we've been trying, and we'll just redouble our efforts. But I'm very proud of the work we've done, and really sheriff's been recognized on a national level for what we've been doing in our community.
As a matter of fact, I believe, Sheriff, that you actually went to Washington regarding hate crimes. Was it last year?
Yes, Captain Wisbicki went. He went in my place, but we were the only law enforcement agency in the country that was invited to speak about assaults on the homeless. Unfortunately, Florida led the country in assaults on homeless individuals, and we were asked to come to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I prepared some testimony that was read into the record. And Captain Wisbicki actually went up to the Senate and spoke, the only law enforcement agency in the country that was invited to speak about hate crimes.
This is hate crimes with specifically with regard to the homeless. I believe
Yes.
that your department and the state of Florida took the initiative in this area. Is that correct?
And we're the second state in the country that added homelessness to their hate crime statute.
And
Maryland being one, we were number two.
And don't you think that was probably provoked because of that that video that was caught with those kids beating up on that homeless person, and it went viral throughout the country, throughout the world?
Absolutely. That was the attention getter. That was a heinous crime. And that's what prompted Maryland to do it in their state. And that's what I said. How could another state take our case and include it in their statute, and we're not doing it? And I went to Ari Porth, Jeremy Ring from the Florida legislature, and said, guys, we need to do this here. We can't let Maryland do that based on our case and we not do it. They ran with it. Rick made numerous trips to Tallahassee to fight for that, and luckily it was passed, overwhelmingly passed. I think it was like 58-2 that it passed, and now we're the second state.
Do you know, I don't know if you're keeping track of this, but do you know of any other states that have also passed a hate crimes bill inclusive of the homeless?
I think there's 2 more states that have passed it. But what was interesting, a year ago, we got a call from the state of Colorado asking for our help because they have tried for 4 years also to get it passed. Unfortunately, it fell 2 votes short on the last subcommittee. And when I read the witness list for all the Senate and the House, there's not one police chief or one sheriff that went to bat for the homeless in the state of Colorado.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate all of you gentlemen being here tonight. You have certainly clarified, elucidated, and have championed the issue of hate crimes. And I know the gay and lesbian community is appreciative of all your efforts and actually your initiatives. You haven't just responded, but you have taken the initiative. And certainly, as we've heard from Mike Albetta, the gay community has been enriched by the fact that you have embraced members of the gay community to work on the force, to act in civilian capacity, and you're saying to us that the culture is now changing, and being the head honcho, I guess, of all police and enforcement officers in the county, we're hoping that attitude permeates through the rest of the enforcement agencies throughout the county, because you have your hands full with over 30 well, at least over 30 cities, not as many agencies, but over 30 cities in the county. So I really appreciate everyone being here tonight. This has been our second show, and I believe that your voices and your participation tonight will continue to make this show a success. Next week on our show at 9 o'clock, we have invited and we have as our guest County Commissioner Chip LaMarca. Commissioner LaMarca is the only Republican on the all-Democratic county commission, and he's a newcomer to politics in terms of holding elective office. And we are pleased that he's accepted our invitation, and there are a lot of questions we would love to ask of him. He's an unknown, especially within the gay community, and he's an individual that I actually come to know a little bit better this past week, having attended a conference with him in Washington. And I feel that by having him on the show, everyone will benefit hearing his views, hearing our feelings about who he is as an individual. So I invite you all to stay tuned next week, 9 a.m., WFTL, 850 on your AM dial. I want to thank my guests, my producer, Danny Pryor, as well as everybody else who has helped to make this happen. Thank you and good night.